Welcome to the debate. Usually when we think of a medieval castle, the imagery that comes to mind is deeply defensive. We picture thick stone walls, deep foundations, maybe a moat.
Right. The classic fortress.
Exactly. The architecture is designed to protect whoever is inside and keep the rest of the world out. It establishes this very binary system of power. You are either inside the walls enjoying the protection of the state, or you're outside them, completely vulnerable to the elements.
Yeah, and if you're on the outside and you suddenly realize that the people inside those walls are actively poisoning the well you drink from, well, your options are incredibly limited.
Right.
You can either stand in the mud and hurl rocks at the stone walls, hoping something eventually cracks. Or you can try to find a way through the gates, put on their livery, and attempt to dismantle the corruption from the throne room.
Which introduces the core question we are tackling today. We are exploring the castle paradox. This is a conceptual framework detailed in Alberto Daniel Hill's sibling works, specifically the novella Violeta Digital and its companion piece, The People's Code.
Two fascinating pieces of techno-art.
Truly. And the debate is this. When confronted with deeply entrenched, systemic corruption, what is the most effective and ethical response? I will be arguing that when institutions use their power to mask catastrophic negligence, the outsider path of radical digital disruption, so essentially hacktivism, is the only effective mechanism to shatter that entrenched power and force transparency.
And I will be arguing that the insider path of institutional reform is the ethically superior and, frankly, sustainably effective strategy. The outsider path of disruption, while it might feel really satisfying in the moment, inevitably prioritizes ideological purity over actual sustainable governance, and it carries disastrous collateral damage that affects the very people it claims to protect.
So let's start with the reality of how corrupt institutions operate, because that really dictates why the outsider approach is absolutely necessary. Entrenched power structures, the guardians of the castle, so to speak, they rely on what Hill terms a protocol of silence.
Right.
And this isn't just your standard political spin. We see this vividly in the narrative of Violeta Digital. Alberto, the protagonist, joins this clandestine collective known as Llama Violeta, or the Violet Flame.
Sounds very dramatic.
It is, yeah. They intercept classified data exposing a tripartite scandal that they dub Agua Gate.
Wait, before you go further into their tactics, let's unpack that protocol of silence concept, because listeners might hear that and think it's just, a fancy term for a standard government cover-up. What is the actual mechanism there?
It's a systemic manipulation of reality across multiple vectors. It relies heavily on semantic minimization.
Okay, give me an example.
So, for example, instead of admitting to a catastrophic environmental failure, state media and these compromised agencies will call it an unplanned discharge event.
Bureaucratic speak.
Exactly. They combine this complicity with technical obfuscation, hiding the actual data behind bureaucratic walls. So in the Agua Gate scandal, the Ministry of Environment is actively suppressing scientific warnings regarding toxic chemical runoff in the Santa Lucia River Basin.
And that runoff is linked to specific corporations, right?
Yes, specifically large agro-industrial conglomerates. Like the UPM pulp mill. They are vastly exceeding legal discharge limits, and they're doing it with the state's blessing.
And on top of the environmental disaster, there is the financial corruption.
Exactly. The files also reveal systemic procurement fraud at the state water utility, OSE. Contracts are just being completely rigged to favor shell companies. I mean, the state is literally allowing the drinking water of its citizens to be contaminated while lining the pockets of corporate allies.
It's incredibly bleak.
It is, and if Llama Violeta doesn't use outsider tactics to exfiltrate this data and force it into the public domain, the public just keeps drinking poison water while the state smiles and denies there's a problem. The system is designed to protect itself. It will never voluntarily indict itself.
Well, I come at it from a different way. A listener hearing about this Agua Gate data dump might be thinking, great, the bad guys get exposed. But they aren't considering the logistics and the actual fallout of that dump.
How so?
The outsider path, as depicted in the novella, is fundamentally reckless. It is a self-destructive martyrdom that confuses burning a system down with building a better one, True systemic change just doesn't come from a dramatic, chaotic data leak.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the execution of these methods. You use the word chaotic, but when you look at the operational mechanics of Llama Violeta, it is meticulously planned.
Is it, though?
It is surgical. Alberto leverages his project management professional training to actually structure their campaign. When they acquire the Agua Gate files, they don't just dump them to one media outlet.
Well, because a single media outlet in a corrupt state can be pressured with gag orders or, have their funding threatened.
Precisely. The state can silence a newspaper, but they cannot silence mathematics. So Llama Violeta utilizes decentralized blockchain storage networks to ensure the evidence is completely censorship-resistant.
Let's explain the mechanics of that for the listener. When people hear blockchain, they usually just think of cryptocurrency. How does that apply to a whistleblower data leak?
Good point. A blockchain is essentially a distributed, immutable ledger. So when Mateo, the collective's infrastructure engineer, uploads the Agua Gate files to the blockchain, the data is copied and verified across thousands of independent computers globally.
So there's no central point of failure?
Right. There is no single server in Montevideo for the Uruguayan police to raid and unplug. It's hydra-headed. And to disseminate this, they don't rely on standard internet service providers. They intercept weather satellite data streams for clandestine communication.
Wow.
Yeah, and Mateo sets up cascading Tor networks.
Right. The onion router, basically bouncing the encrypted data through multiple volunteer nodes around the world, so the origin point of the leak becomes mathematically impossible to trace back to their warehouse.
Yes, exactly. And they use automated bots to distribute the sanitized data and infographics prepared by Elena, their data analyst. This isn't anarchy. It is a highly disciplined, moral imperative. It's truth-telling engineered specifically to survive an oppressive state apparatus that holds a monopoly on violence.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You keep using the word surgical, but the climax of the book explicitly demonstrates the inherent physical danger of these actions.
I mean, they were cornered.
But that's the point. It's easy to call it surgical when you're just talking about distributed ledgers and cascading Tor nodes in theory. But what happens when the digital net actually closes around their physical location?
They have to adapt.
They do more than adapt. When the militarized police surround their port warehouse, Alberto scales the fence of a local electrical substation. He arms a custom-built high-energy EMP generator, an electromagnetic pulse, and he detonates it.
To save his team.
I want to be very clear about how an EMP works, though. It emits a burst of electromagnetic energy so intense that it induces massive, uncontrolled electrical currents in nearby electronics, physically frying the circuits.
Right, to take out the police radios.
Yes, but Alberto intentionally causes a cascading blackout across the local electrical grid just to disable those police radio communications. So his team, Sofia, Elena, and Mateo, can escape through subterranean tunnels.
It was an act of desperate self-preservation.
It crosses a massive, glaring line from digital transparency into the reckless endangerment of critical public infrastructure. Think about the physical reality of taking down a city's power grid. What if there were hospitals on that sector of the grid reliant on ventilators?
The text doesn't explicitly say.
What if emergency services couldn't respond to a fire because their comms were fried? The outsider path inevitably escalates from digital disruption into physical disruption. You simply cannot govern a society with a sledgehammer.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You are entirely focused on the collateral damage of the escape, which, let's remember, was provoked by a disproportionate state crackdown.
It was a police raid on a hacktivist cell.
But what about the collateral damage of silence? We have to look at the underlying ethical premise of Alberto's involvement. His personal motto throughout the book is, "Human knowledge belongs to the world."
Right.
If a watchman sees a dam breaking, keeping quiet because he lacks the proper permit to sound the alarm is the true crime.
But is it the watchman's place to sound the alarm by blowing up the warning bell so no one else can ever use it?
Let's expand your counter-analogy, though. It's not just that the watchman lacks a permit. It's that the people who issue the permits are the exact same corrupt officials who sold the faulty concrete for the dam in the first place.
Okay, fair.
And they are currently making millions while the valley floods. The state isn't just passively negligent in Violeta Digital. They are actively burying the science. And you can see the justification in the public reaction.
The protests?
Yes. When the bots forced the data to the citizens of Montevideo, they swarmed the Plaza Independencia. They bang pots and pans and massive cacerolazos and chant, "No es sequía, es saqueo."
It's not drought, it's plunder.
Exactly. The citizens instantly recognized that the system had betrayed them. Therefore, Alberto's unique expertise, his first-hand knowledge of the enemy, ethically obligates him to bypass those corrupted legal channels.
Even if it means vigilantism?
To do nothing, to wait for an insider reformist politician who may never actually arrive, is to be complicit in the plunder.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the incredibly dangerous precedent of unelected, unaccountable individuals deciding what constitutes the truth?
They aren't deciding the truth, they're revealing it.
But you say Alberto's motto is human knowledge belongs to the world. Llama Violeta isn't just sharing knowledge, though. They're actively weaponizing classified data. When Mateo deploys that automated botnet to force this data into the public sphere, they are entirely circumventing democratic due process. They are acting as judge, jury, and executioner of public perception.
They are bypassing a broken judiciary, yes.
But who audits the hackers? Who ensures that Elena's so-called sanitized infographics aren't just presenting a highly skewed, cherry-picked version of the facts that perfectly aligns with their own radical ideology?
Well, I already answered that. They released the primary source documents alongside the infographics on the blockchain. The proof is mathematically verifiable by anyone with an internet connection.
If they have the technical literacy to read it.
True, but they aren't asking the public to blindly trust them. They are providing the raw data.
But the mechanism of release is entirely dictatorial. In a functional society, we have to rely on legal and institutional frameworks, flawed as they may be, to process wrongdoing. By normalizing this kind of radical, forced transparency, you invite a digital vigilantism. You're saying that anyone with a high enough level of technical literacy can just decide to burn down an institution they disagree with?
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the functional society you describe is a complete illusion. It is a maze specifically designed to trap people who try to play by the rules.
That's a very cynical view of institutions.
But it's backed up by reality. We don't even have to look at the fiction of the novella to prove this. We just have to look at the real-life trauma of the author, Alberto Daniel Hill. The events of this book aren't purely hypothetical. His lived experience proves that the system absolutely cannot be trusted from within.
His story is undeniably tragic, yes, but we need to separate his specific case from the broader strategy.
You really can't separate them because his specific case illustrates exactly how the castle treats the people who try to use the front gate.
Walk me through it then.
Let's walk through it. In 2014, the real Alberto Hill found massive, glaring security vulnerabilities in a major medical clinic in Uruguay, the Círculo Católico.
What kind of vulnerabilities are we talking about?
Basic, catastrophic negligence. Administrator credentials left at their default factory settings, unsecured servers, CAPTCHA bypasses, meaning automated programs could just hammer the login screens without being stopped. Sensitive patient data was just sitting there, totally exposed to the open internet.
Wow. Just entirely open?
Yes. Now, Hill didn't exfiltrate this data. He didn't drop it on a blockchain. He attempted a responsible disclosure. He played by the exact insider rules you're advocating for. He emailed a red alert to the National CERT,
The Computer Emergency Response Team, the official government body for cybersecurity.
Correct. He handed them the blueprints to fix the problem. And what happened? He was completely betrayed. 3 years went by. In 2017, unrelated ransomware criminals attacked that same clinic.
And the authorities needed a scapegoat.
Precisely. The judiciary, which was entirely technically illiterate, panicked. They didn't go after the ransomware gang, they targeted the messenger.
Because they fundamentally couldn't understand the difference between a cybersecurity professional finding a structural flaw and a malicious actor exploiting one.
Exactly. It's like arresting the building inspector for arson because he warned you the wiring was faulty before the fire started. In 2017, Hill was arrested. The incompetence was staggering. The arrest warrant even had his name misspelled.
That's just wild.
It gets worse. He was paraded before the press as a master hacker, locked in maximum security facilities at Libertad and Durazno alongside violent cartel members. He was denied his prescribed anxiety medication for 48 hours, inducing severe panic, and was coerced into a false confession just to protect his family from being targeted.
The evidence they used against him was famously absurd, wasn't it?
It is laughable if it wasn't so devastating. During the trial, the prosecution actually presented printed pages of firewall logs, literally just meaningless lines of code, and an anonymous mask they found in his apartment as physical electronic evidence of a crime.
Unbelievable.
It destroyed his life. And yes, he fought it, and he was fully exonerated 4 years later, but it was a hollow victory. He was left with severe PTSD, complete financial ruin, and global reputational damage. When the legal system is this ignorant and this vindictive, the insider reform path you're championing is a naive fantasy. The castle will crush you long before you can redraw the blueprints.
I want to be very clear that I acknowledge the profound horror of Hill's real-life ordeal. What happened to him was a grotesque failure of justice, just an absolute nightmare of bureaucratic incompetence and state overreach.
Thank you.
The fact that he survived and actually smuggled out the manuscript for his earlier work, Operation Bitcoins, Logging to Hell, written by hand from his prison cell, is a testament to his incredible psychological resilience. But we have to separate his trauma from the strategic efficacy of the methods portrayed in Violeta Digital.
How can you separate them when the book is a direct response to that trauma?
Because trauma does not automatically produce sound strategy. In fact, it often produces a desire for martyrdom. I would argue that Hill's real-life trauma makes the outsider path depicted in Violeta Digital a form of tragic catharsis rather than a viable template for political action. Let's look at the outcome in the novella itself. You praised their surgical precision, but what actually happens to Alberto at the end of the book?
Well, he is captured.
He is captured, yes. He is paraded as a cyber terrorist. The aggressive prosecutor, Fiscal Herrera, successfully convicts him of unauthorized access and damage to critical infrastructure. He is locked away in a high-security facility for 12 years.
But the data gets out.
Yes, Sofia manages to escape to international waters and activates the Omega Drop failsafe, exposing the illegal state surveillance and ensuring the data gets out. But I have to ask you, does a strategy truly succeed if its primary architect must be sacrificed to the machinery of the state? Is a victory really a victory if it requires the self-immolation of the brightest minds we have?
It succeeds if the primary objective is the truth, and the truth outlives the architect. The Omega Drop ensured the violet flame continued to burn. Sometimes penetrating that protocol of silence requires a sacrifice because the system just will not yield otherwise.
But Hill's other work proves it doesn't have to be a sacrifice. We can't ignore the alternate narrative he presents in The People's Code. In the chapter The Statesman's Gambit, the fictional Alberto takes a completely different path. He's invited by a reformist president to become the Secretary for Digital Transformation and Citizen Oversight. Before accepting, he demands root access.
Which is a massive caveat.
But an essential one. For listeners, in computing, root access means you have the master keys to the system. You can see every hidden file, change every permission level. In a socio-political context, Hill is talking about demanding total, unmitigated transparency into state databases backed by independent funding and robust whistleblower protections.
If a state would ever actually agree to that.
But this insider approach forces structural change without the tragic outcome we see in Violeta Digital. It demands the exact same rigor, the exact same transparency, but it integrates it into the legal architecture of the state, ensuring that reform is democratic, not imposed from the shadows by a vigilante with an EMP. The outsider path is a reaction to trauma. The insider path is the cure for it.
The cure requires a willing patient, and the corrupt state is not a willing patient. When a government deliberately ignores toxic runoff that is poisoning its own citizens, and when it actively manipulates procurement contracts to enrich shell companies, the rot is foundational. The system in Violeta Digital doesn't want to be reformed. It wants to survive.
But the collateral.
And the only way to challenge a system that uses obfuscation as a weapon is to use cryptography as a shield. Decentralized transparency, the kind that cannot be arrested, that cannot be coerced into a false confession without anxiety medication, forces accountability in a way that internal memos and bureaucratic oversight committees never will.
I understand the appeal of that. I really do. The romance of the rogue hacker taking down the corrupt monolith is a deeply powerful narrative. But disruption only highlights the cracks in the castle walls. It doesn't build anything in its place. Let's say Llama Violeta is entirely successful and completely collapses the government's credibility. What then?
You build something new.
But you are left with a massive power vacuum. Only the painstaking, incredibly unglamorous work of insider reform can rebuild the foundation. It requires writing new policies, educating technically illiterate judges so they don't lock up the next whistleblower, and building new, secure infrastructure. And it has to be done without leaving behind a trail of collateral damage, blown electrical grids, and broken lives.
So we are essentially left suspended between these two realities. On one hand, we have the undeniable necessity of exposing catastrophic negligence that the system desperately wants to hide behind its thick stone walls. On the other, we have the immense personal and societal risks of taking that exposure into our own hands from the outside.
I think where we absolutely converge is on the profound realization of just how much power digital information holds in the 21st century. Whether you are inside the castle attempting to govern, or outside it attempting to breach the gates, data is the ultimate currency.
Absolutely.
And both of our perspectives agree that individuals who possess unique technical skills, the cyber forensics experts, the cryptographers, the network architects, they bear an incredibly heavy, almost unavoidable burden. When you possess the literacy to see the vulnerabilities that the rest of society is blind to, you can't just unsee them.
That is deeply true. The burden of first-hand knowledge. It makes me reflect on the sheer psychological weight of what Alberto Daniel Hill accomplished with these works. He engaged in what we might call creative decryption.
Oh, I like that term.
Right? When the physical and legal systems silenced him, when they took his freedom and ruined his reputation, he used fiction as an uncensorable blockchain for the truth. He took the absolute horror of real-life concrete containment, the isolation, the fear, the stolen years, and transformed it into a powerful piece of digital realism. He used his trauma to map the architecture of state power.
He essentially turned his prison cell into a terminal. And in doing so, he mapped out the castle paradox in a way that leaves us grappling with the exact same impossible choices his characters face. It forces every reader to ask what they would do with that level of access.
It is a dilemma with no easy answers. Do you stand outside and throw stones, knowing the state might deploy its full weight to crush you? Or do you walk inside the gates, knowing the castle might slowly rewrite your conscience to protect its own foundations? Violeta Digital invites all of us to weigh the ultimate cost of truth in a world built on code. The walls are high, the foundations are deep. The question remains, how will you approach the gates?